Marisha here, and a lot of what I run up against as someone living abroad are things that anyone would encounter, regardless of which country they're moving to or which country they're coming from. But today I'm going to talk about something that is unique to being an American abroad, and that is the fact that we come from a country that every other country pays attention to. Whether they like it or not, every country on the globe has been influenced or impacted by the US, whether you're talking financially and the role that the US economy plays in the global economy, whether you're talking politically and the US involvement in other countries, whether it's giving foreign aid or getting involved directly in political systems, like, for example, instances where the CIA sort of supported coups, whether you're talking about US involvement in organizations like the UN and NATO and the G8, um, whether you're talking about a cultural influence and the way that American cultural ideals are disseminated through Hollywood films and television, and whether you're talking about the ubiquity of American products like Coca Cola and McDonald's and Nike. So the rest of the world pays attention. And as an American abroad, you will discover that most people are going to know more about your country than you know about their country. And they're going to know about your country's politics, and they are going to talk about it and ask you about it. So when it comes to having conversations about politics with my friends, I love that because they're my friends and I'll talk about anything with my friends. And it's a situation where they are talking to me as Marisha, the individual that they have established a relationship and rapport with, and they are setting aside time to have an actual full conversation that allows for discussion of sort of the complexities and nuances that are associated with political issues. And it also allows for reciprocity, where I can ask them about, politics of Great Britain. But I also get asked by complete strangers, people who just kind of we cross paths in one situation or another. They hear me speak, they hear that I'm American, and they will ask me point blank something like, why do people even vote for Trump? So when I first hear that, I'm taken aback because that's kind of rude to just like open up with some like political question to a stranger. In America, it's not really done. Um, but then my second reaction is I want to answer this, um, because I feel this earnest kind of desire, but also almost a sense of obligation to be a sort of grassroots ambassador for my country. And part of this might be because I actually was expected to be a grassroots ambassador for my country when I was working for the Peace Corps. Um, but I think even if I hadn't had that experience, I would still feel this way. And my guess is that most Americans who are going abroad would feel this way because we are acutely aware of the stereotypes that exist about America. And we, again, have this sort of earnest desire to dispel them. We know that the world thinks that we're like loud and obnoxious and obtuse. And you can see evidence of this in the fact that when you look at recent polls of hospitality workers, people in the tourism industry, when they're asked, which country do the worst almost said terrorists, worst tourists come from? Um, when an American sees an article like that and we click on that article to read it, we are pretty sure it's going to be us. We're like, oh no, people hate us. They're going to say Americans because they're like, they think we're loud and everything. But it's not us. It's actually the Brits, followed by Chinese and then Russians and then um, I think like Germans and Australians. And so Americans are actually kind of far down. And I can guarantee that the reason for that is that over the last couple of decades, as Americans have become aware of people viewing us this way, we have been extra careful when traveling abroad to dial back the loudness. Um, I know a lot of Americans intentionally sort of study even like what they should wear and not wear so that they can blend in just even physically. And then also, yeah, again, use our indoor voices, try to be much more aware of kind of what's going around us so that we can blend in. And so I think you are seeing the result of that self awareness when you're looking at polls like that and the fact that we're not number one. um, and so I think that's also true, obviously, when you're running up against these opportunities where people are asking about things that are going on in your country and they're asking about Trump. Or another thing that I get a lot is the gun situation. So it doesn't even have to be an election year for this to happen to you. Um, we want to dispel the idea that all Americans are Trump supporting Florida men, right? But how do you do that with a stranger who doesn't know you, and they're not viewing you as an individual. They're viewing you as just an American, like right, any American will do because they're all interchangeable. And you don't know them, so you don't know what context they have for this topic. They're not wanting to sit down and have a whole conversation. You feel like they sort of expect you to have just kind of like a sound bite to answer this question. How do you do that so that it's accurate and it's concise and it's not defensive, but it also definitely conveys that, like, look, yeah, there are people who vote for Trump, but that's not the majority of people. Even in 2016 when he won because of the Electoral College. With popular vote, he didn't win. Um, so if you're an American abroad, this is something that you will struggle with because it's not just when people directly ask you, but you're also sort of aware when you're living abroad, especially, that people are sort of looking at you as an American, and there are going to be people who will look at you as an American and assume that the way that you behave is indicative of like is representative of all Americans. In the Peace Corps, we called this living in the fishbowl because in the Peace Corps, especially, you really were being watched all the time. And you were often in situations where, you're in a community where you're the first American that anybody there has ever met. And you might very well be the only American that those people will ever meet. And so you do need to really be careful about the way that you are conducting yourself so that people understand that again, not all Americans are, fill in the blank with whatever the stereotype is that you think about Americans. um when you're living abroad, even if you're not in the Peace Corps, right? Like, I'm not working for the government anymore. Like, I'm just here trying to live my life. I am acutely aware that there are going to be people who will judge my words and actions to be representative of all Americans. So it's a lot of pressure that you sort of put on yourself. And maybe it's unnecessary because maybe I should adopt the attitude of like, who gives a flying fart in space what people think? I'm just going to live my life, and they can be ignorant if they want, right? Um but because you love your country, right? And you are aware that your country, is not necessarily viewed positively by everybody, you do want them to understand, like, again, like, you're talking about a country of 300 million people that's geographically the size of Europe. There's a lot of diversity there, and you want people to understand that. So you do sort of feel it. And as an American abroad, you constantly carry this tension of understanding the problems that your country has. Like, I'm well aware of the fact that there is this far right fascist um, sort of subgroup within my country, just like there is in a lot of countries in Europe as well. It's a problem that I think people really need to be thinking about, is this sort of trend of this rise in fascism across the West. Um, I'm aware of the gun problem. I'm aware of the healthcare problem, right? To be fully aware of your country's problems and weaknesses, but to also still love your country and be aware of what your country gets right. And living abroad will magnify that. it really helps you to see your country more clearly, both in terms of what its weaknesses are and what its strengths are, because you have that distance and you are able to see the way that it is represented in foreign news media as well. And so you see kind of what people are being fed about your country as well. So you constantly carry this tension of, like, I know, and I'm going to speak out about what the problems are in my country, but that doesn't mean that I don't love my country. In fact, it's the opposite. I do love my country, and that's why, and I know that it can be better, which is why I'm talking about these things. But I want people to understand that there are also a lot of great things about my country. So it becomes this issue of, how do you then go about doing that? It's easy when you're with your friends because you have all of this time to spend with them and whatever. But when you're talking with strangers, how exactly do you address that specific situation where someone just met you, someone just met you, and they're asking you about Trump, or they're asking you about guns, or they're asking you about, whatever. Um, you need to think about it ahead of time so that you're prepared to have an answer. So if you are an American thinking about even just traveling abroad, because you don't have to be living abroad to experience this. I was in a hostel in Cashel, Ireland in 2016, and a Swedish couple there was grilling me about Trump. Um, think about it ahead of time so that you have kind of an idea of how you would answer those questions. And that means that you need to know what you think about these issues. So if you are someone who has not thought about politics because you feel like it's just so divisive and people are so mean and it's dirty, and so I don't want to be involved in it, I just want to bury my head in the sand and just like chill out and just live my life or whatever, you can't do that, because whether you like it or not, your life is directly impacted by politics, right? Who is in charge in the White House and in the legislature and in at the state and local levels impacts your life. So as much as it can be stressful, right? To hear really divisive rhetoric and hear people get into arguments about things, and to see, relationships, friendships, family relationships just fall apart over politics. Yes, that it's ugly, but you cannot bury your head in the sand about it. You have to be informed on the issues, and you have to think about what you think about different issues, what you believe about different issues. Not just in case you run into a foreigner who asks you about it, but even if you never travel and you never run up against foreigners, you need to know about this, because we need to have an informed electorate. Um, so be thinking about, how do I feel about these various issues? And if you're not even sure, like, what a foreigner might ask you beyond, why are people voting for Trump, or why can't you guys get your act together about guns? Go onto the BBC website, or go onto some Canadian websites, or get a hold of some foreign newspapers and read the stories that are being reported on, so that you get an idea of what is getting reported on, and B, how are people talking about it? How are they reporting on it? And it'll give you some idea. Um, and also, you do need to be aware of what's going on in other countries, because it does impact us. One of the problems with America is that a lot of Americans just sort of think that we're an island and what happens in other countries doesn't matter. But we're all interconnected. It's a global society. You have to be aware of what's going on in other countries. And the things that other countries are worried about with this upcoming election are things that impact Americans as well. Um, so some of the things that people are probably thinking about the most, people from other countries, when they're, following this election, are the fact that depending on who gets elected, it might very well determine the outcome of what's going on in Ukraine. It might very well determine what happens with Gaza and now Lebanon and Yemen. I mean, things are heating up in the Middle East, and America is going to play a role in that. And what role that is determined on who gets elected. It will determine whether we take the lead on fighting climate change or whether we bury our heads in the sand about it and pretend it doesn't exist. It will determine our involvement in organizations like NATO. Trump has said he'll pull out of NATO. And that is something that should matter to you as an American. That doesn't just impact Europe. So there are a lot of issues at stake here that require you as an American to to care and to cast your vote. So on that note, there is actually still time in many states to register to vote if you haven't registered yet. Go to your state website and see what the deadline is. But I think for a lot of states, it is sometime in October. So there's time to register. If you are registered, make a point of voting so that we are actually represented, so that the people who are elected are actually representative of the American people because enough American people have voiced their views. I am going to head on up to the post office and mail my absentee ballot. In the meantime, like, subscribe, tell your friends how gnarly this channel is, and I'll see you next time.